So when we talk about World War One. I want to show you this image on the screen. It turns out that every country on this screen represents, in green or yellow, a country that fought in World War One, a country that was represented, a country that participated. There's two teams in World War One. There's the green team, which are the Allies, and there is the yellow, which at this time are called the Central Powers. And it's called World War One because you know who's involved in World War One? The world, right? If you look at it. And the thing about World War One is it's different because we've talked about like the Franco-Prussian War, France versus Germany, the Russo-Japanese War, Russia versus Japan, the Spanish-American War, Spain. But this is World War One. So let's talk about how we got here. And it actually starts off with this country on the slide. This is a country that we've talked about before. This is actually the Austrian Empire. And looking at this image earlier, what does every color on this map represent? A different what? A different ethnic group, right? And one of the things we've talked about is there is something called nationalism. And listen, there's a problem with something called nationalism. You know what the problem with nationalism is? The problem is that every single person who is believes in nationalism, they're going to want to have their own country for their own people. And so if you look at the map on the slide, every single group of people on this map wants to be free. And this could be a problem. In fact, it says on the handout that the Austrian Empire ruled much of the Balkan Peninsula. It says on the map, hold on 1 second. It says on the map that it was, you'll write down, a multi-ethnic empire. That's what it was. And there's one group that really wants independence of this multi-ethnic empire. And we'll write down that that is a group of people, that's the Serbs. We'll write down the Serbs were one ethnic group who really wanted independence. They really wanted independence. Now I want to show you this map of the area. So here is Austria, and you'll notice that right below Austria is a pretty small country labeled Serbia. So Austria-Hungary is one country in purple. There's a smaller country called Serbia. But it turns out that there was also Serbians who lived in the Austrian Empire. And they didn't want to live in the Austrian Empire. They wanted to break off. They wanted to be free. They wanted to be independent. When we look at this map, you can see that one of this region over here, there are Serbs that live here, and they want to break off and be independent. They want to break off and be free, and they think their opportunity is coming. Because it turns out right here is a city near Serbia called Sarajevo, and it turns out something really interesting is about to happen in Sarajevo. It turns out this guy, he is about to take a tour of the city of Sarajevo that has people who live in it who are Serbs who want independence. This guy, he's like one of the leaders of the Austrian Empire. And if I want freedom for my people, and this guy's about to go through my town, what can I do to send a message? I can. And in fact, I will. We see on the slide the assassination of this guy. We'll write down his name. His name is Franz Ferdinand. And Franz Ferdinand was this leader of the Austrian Empire, and he was shot and killed in his car driving through the city of Sarajevo. And his death is going to trigger a chain of events that starts World War I. I want to review that chain of events with you now. So here's our map of Europe at the time. Here's Austria. And they're in a situation where they lose one of their leaders. He gets assassinated by some Serbians. If you're the government of Austria and you're looking for someone to blame, someone to fight, someone to invade as a result of this, what country on this map are you going to invade if a Serbian man killed your leader? Serbia. Now, look at the size difference. Is it anywhere close? Is Serbia a big country? No. So Austria looks at Serbia and says, hey, your people killed our leader. We're going to go to war with you. And it looks like it should be pretty easy. I mean, remember how wars have gone: Spanish-American, Sino-Japanese, Franco-Prussian. I think this is probably going to be a quick, easy win for us. I'm not afraid. But there's a reason to be afraid, because it turns out that Serbia is kind of different than the other parts of Europe. They are a special type of Christianity called Orthodox. And it turns out there's a country that is also Orthodox that kind of sees themselves as Serbia's big brother. What is the largest Orthodox country in the world? No, Germany is half Protestant and half Catholic. We saw this yesterday. There's a country that's the largest Orthodox country in the world. Actually, that country is Russia. So what happens is Austria declares war on Serbia, but then Russia steps in and says, hey man, you cannot mess with Serbia. They are like our little brother. And so Russia declares war on Austria. Okay, that's not what I was expecting. I wasn't looking to get into that. And Austria needs some help. If only there was someone Austria could turn to. If only there was someone that Austria would have a big brother that had their same cultural values, even their same language, and it turns out it does. You know who Austria's big brother is that also speaks the same language? Germany. They speak German in Austria. And so in this conflict, a terrorist kills the leader of Austria. Austria declares war on Serbia. Russia says, hold up, we are declaring war on you, Austria. And then Germany steps in and says, hold up, we, Germany, are declaring war on you, Russia. But then things get even more complex, because it turns out Russia has a friend also. And you know who Russia's friend is? France. France declares war on Germany. Now, Germany is in a bit of a difficult situation, because what does Germany have to deal with if they're fighting France and they're fighting Russia? On both sides, right? So they need a solution to this problem, and they do have a solution to this problem, because even though I'm fighting both sides, if you had to pick which country is weaker, if you had to pick which country is worse, which country I have to worry less about, is it going to be France or is it going to be Russia? Well, I get you're saying France. I mean, I did fight a war with them, Germany could say, and I did beat them up. But what's like the one word that characterizes Russia? They're backwards. Actually, actually, Russia's backwards. They don't have trains. They don't have modern technology. In fact, if I go to war with Russia, they have so few trains, the Russian army is literally gonna have to walk from places like St. Petersburg all the way to where the fighting is. It could take them a month or two to get ready to fight. You know what I think we should do? I think what we need to do, Germany says, I think we need to get all of our soldiers and send every single one of them just focus on France. Knock out France. Take care of them. And if we do it right, we could actually destroy France in a few weeks. And then, because Germany, we do have like a great train network, we'll put our soldiers on those trains. We'll take them all the way across the country. Before Russia has even fully got their stuff together, we'll be waiting for them on the border. That's their plan. That's what they decide to do. But there's a small hiccup to the plan. Because listen, I told you already, you study, you know, that France and Germany have already fought a war over this border called Alsace-Lorraine. France has already lost it. Guess what France has done all along the border to protect themselves from anything else that might happen? They put guns, they put soldiers, they put all kinds of stuff. So Germany has a small problem, Because if we invade through France, this is literally one of the most defended borders on the planet. But take a look at the area one more time. You see, Paris is the capital of France. And they look at the map and say, if only there's a way we could get into France without going through that little border, is there another country they could cut through to get to France and get close to Paris? Belgium. Now, Belgium actually at this time was trying to stay neutral. Belgium was like, hey, we're not all about World War I. We're more about like chopping people's hands off and enslaving people for rubber and killing 10 million people in the Congo. That's more our thing. And they don't want to be part of this war. Regardless, the Germans go through Belgium. They have to fight Belgium, and they go through Belgium to get to France. Belgium's been dragged into the war. But that's okay because Belgium has a big brother too. Great Britain. Great Britain declares war on Germany to protect them. But that's okay because there's another country who jumps in, a country we haven't talked a lot about recently. It's labeled here as Turkey, but it wasn't called Turkey back then. What was it called back then? Ottoman Empire. And so this war started with one man assassinated in Sarajevo. Austria declares war on Serbia. Russia declares war on Austria. Germany declares war on Russia. Germany declares war on France. Germany invades Belgium to get to France. Britain declares war on Germany. The Ottoman Empire jumps in because why not? Look at this cartoon. This cartoon kind of like shows you how we got here. You have little Serbia, a small little inconsequential country. Austria is trying to grab them. Austria tries to go to war with Serbia. Russia says, what the heck do you think you're doing? Don't mess with Serbia. They're our guy. Germany jumps into the war. What the heck are you doing? Austria is my friend. They're our guy. France jumps in. What the heck are you doing to Russia? Don't you mess with them. They're our guy. And it goes on and on and on. And again, by the way, just to remind you, how many people died to start this war? Just one guy. Just Franz Ferdinand, right? All these things happen and lead us to a war where every country in green or yellow is fighting. Correct. Well, she was not the leader. She was not the leader, so she's still important. On our handout, it says this. It says, there are three underlying causes that lead to this war breaking out. Number one is the issue of nationalism. And nationalism, it says, bound citizens to their ethnic group. Germans proud of it being Germans. Russians proud to be Russian. British proud to be British. And this is going to be a problem. Number two, we also have a system of, write down, alliances. It was devised to protect themselves, these powers. France had a secret alliance with Russia. Russia had an alliance with Serbia. Britain an alliance with Belgium. Austria an alliance with Germany. So this is why we have one guy's death and his wonderful wife, I'm sure she was lovely, leading to the entire world, directly or indirectly, being dragged into this war. Number three, we also have Germany's desire to dominate Europe. And spoiler alert, this desire doesn't go away after World War I. In fact, it's going to continue in World War II. And then it says on your handout that nationalism was a dividing force in these three empires. Three parts of the world where nationalism, pride in your ethnic group, is tearing you apart. Those three include, you'll write down, Austria. We already saw the map of all the ethnic groups in Austria. Yeah, it's going to tear Austria apart. Second country that is multi-ethnic and that comes with challenges, you'll write down, is Russia. There's all these Turks. There are these Muslim groups. It's going to threaten to tear Russia apart. And the third group is the Ottoman Empire. It says So not Muslims' fault at all. Uh, they are just like all people. They want their freedom. They want their independence. It says on the handout that the independence of Serbia from the Austrian Empire. Now, the Serbs are part of a broader group of people in the area. And we've used this word before. What are those people called in the Balkans? And in fact, because they were like the soldiers for the Ottomans, our modern word slave comes from these people. What are the ethnic group of these white Europe? Yeah, we're going to write down. This gave hope to other Slavic populations. Our word slave comes from the Slavs. If you ask a Muslim from Turkey, what comes to your mind when you think of a slave? They're like, oh, easy, a white guy from the Balkan Peninsula, a Slav. Our word slave comes from the thousands of white Europeans brought into slavery. And so if Serbians get their freedom, everyone in the Slavic regions are going to want that too. And another problem, it says on the handout, is Europeans did not remember how terrible war could be. Europeans didn't remember how terrible war could be. Think about some of the last experiences they had. Like, was the Spanish-American War terrible? Was the Sepoy Rebellion terrible for the British? No. What about the Opium War? In fact, if you look for the last 50 to 75 years, European countries are like dominating the planet. So my experience is war is quick, war is easy, you get a bunch of free stuff. I think we should just probably like rush into war. How bad could it be? It says on the handout, the last major destructive wars for Europe had been during the, you'll write down, Napoleonic Wars. Like, it has been literally 100 years since war gave me a bad memory. And that was in the early, you'll write down, 1800s. The early 1800s. I have to go 100 years ago before I could find someone that remembers how truly terrible war could be. And if you don't have any experience with that, there's nothing to pump the brakes to say, don't rush into war. In fact, two examples, there was this Crimean War, there was the Franco-Prussian War that we mentioned yesterday. They had been, you'll write down, quick victories. Those were quick victories. They were over with relatively little damage. And what other conflicts had white Europeans been a part of? It says on the next line, new imperialism, these wars in Africa and Asia. You'll write down Africa and Asia. Remember, there was something called the Scramble for Africa. Remember how they conquered almost all of Africa except for Liberia and Ethiopia? And remember Asia, they took over India, even though the sepoys said no. They took over China, even though the Boxers said no. All of those victories had very small, you'll write down, cost in Europe. There's almost no experience I have that tells me this is not going to be a good thing. I'm sure I'll be home by summer. How bad could World War I be? This led Europe to, you'll write down, a false sense of confidence. A false sense of confidence. Another source of confidence is how well Germany's doing. Germany's like a new kid on the block. Like, they literally came together after the 1870s. They never existed before. But you know what? They realized the best thing they could do is to industrialize, is to modernize, is to have technology. Germany got it. And as a result, you're going to write down, Germany was the most industrialized country in Europe. And the trend is typically, the more industrialized you are, the better you are. What's the one Asian nation that took this lesson to heart? Japan. We talked about yesterday about something called the Meiji Restoration. Meiji is to be modernized. They were the modernized Japan, and then they started beating up their own neighborhood and having their own empire of their own. Sorry, Korea. It says on the handout, there's three nations that make up the Central Powers, three main nations. What are they? The purple ones. Yeah. Germany, Austria, and Turkey. The three main ones. Now, actually, Bulgaria's there, but no offense to our Bulgarian friends, but I don't know if anyone said, watch out, the Bulgarian army. But again, all respect to Bulgaria. Hats off to you guys. Hat tip to Bulgaria.
They're like arch like friends for the
Hey, it says on the handout, three major countries that were part of the Allies. The three important ones. Who do we have? No, Spain is yellow. They're neutral.
Oh, they're neutral?
Yeah.
France?
France?
Russia and Italy.
Major ones.
Oh, Great Britain.
Great Britain. So France and Britain, and then Russia. Italy's there, but come on. You're Italy.
Once again,
We talked about Italy. Remember how they tried to invade Ethiopia and failed? They were one of the only European powers to be majorly defeated by an African nation. Embarrassing. And that's going to be something Italy's going to want to fix during World War II when they invade Ethiopia a second time. It says on the handout, Europeans plan to use this new technology to quickly move troops. What were they going to use? Trains. And it says on the handout, Germany hoped to defeat France in a matter of weeks. They thought weeks. They thought, I don't got time for months. And they hoped to move their troops to the eastern border to Russia before they could fully, you'll write down, mobilize. Their hope is Russia's so backwards. Their hope is Russia is so technology deficient that before they can walk their soldiers to the border, we would be done with France and ready to fight in the east. There is, though, of course, what neutral nation was invaded by Germany because they were in the way? Belgium. And who vowed to protect little baby Belgium? Great Britain. This is how we get World War I. Now, they also called World War I the war to end all wars because they thought, man, this was terrible. I'm sure this will never happen again. Now, because these countries are kind of equally divided, like it's not really equal if it's like the US versus the Philippines. It's not really equal if you have the British versus the Chinese. Remember yesterday we talked about the Boxer Rebellion? What was like the hope the Boxers had to defeat white Europeans? What were they hoping was going to happen to them physically when they fought? Yeah, they thought we'll become possessed by spirits and become bulletproof. The Boxer Rebellion thought 1 million soldiers from heaven are going to come down and kill white people. So we have two choices. My choice is either, like the Japanese, hey, I'm going to modernize, we're going to become engineers, and we'll build weapons and like use tanks like Europeans. Or the Chinese are like, I'm going to become bulletproof by becoming spirit possessed and hope that 1 million soldiers come down from heaven. Not a good idea. And it turns out, of course, if you're fighting people that are going with spirit possession and angels from heaven fighting for you, you're going to beat those people. But what happens with countries that are on the same level? Like Britain and Germany fight. I don't know if that's going to be a few weeks and you're done. Both sides fight to a tie. We call this tie a stalemate, forming an unbroken line that stretched 300 miles. If you look at the slide, this is what we have referred to when we saw in the movie called a trench. They've got machine guns, I've got machine guns. And so you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to dig my trench, they're going to dig their trench, and then I'm going to be a few hundred yards. And we can look at each other. In fact, if you look at this picture, these people, they have these guns, but what's this part of the gun? What's going on here? What is this for? Yeah. Like, or like a periscope, right? I don't want to put my head up because like you'll get shot. So we also have introduced tanks for the first time. So we're getting better at killing each other. We have machine guns, we have tanks. We also have, again, as I mentioned, machine guns in major ways for the first time. we also have, because these guys are wearing these things, what else do we have? Poison gas for the first time. This guy's been burned on his face and his hands because his chest, not so much, because that's where his uniform was. But we have men blinded by poison gas. We've used our knowledge of science and physics to make guns more powerful and chemistry to kill. They are banned, but people still have them. In fact, I think Syria gassed people like in the last 4 years or so, which is sad. Most of the poison gas used today is sadly in the Middle East. The most famous person who used chemical gas was Saddam Hussein. There's an ethnic group of Muslims called the Kurds. Now, Saddam Hussein was a Muslim. He was Sunni. But there's a group of Muslims called the Kurds that no one likes. And because they're a different type of Muslims, Saddam gassed them. Women, children. It was terrible. And so that was in the 80s that he gassed the Kurds, 1980s, yeah. And just a few years ago, Syria gassed their own people in some villages as well. That was like no, I don't know if that was before Trump. I think it was in the last years of Obama. I think it happened. Okay. I don't remember the details. But so people still have, it's illegal. Because it's kind of weird because we have like legal ways you can kill people and like illegal. Like it's still like, you're still killing people. But we're like, well, that's not an okay way to kill people. You know, like the only way to kill people is this way. So poison gas is illegal today. And so it says on the handout, that this line of trenches and fortifications was known as the Western Front. Flip the page. And it says on the back side that the most potent new weapon they had were machine guns. The most potent new weapons they had were machine guns. And to escape these machine gun fire, soldiers dug line of trenches. And this is why we have something called trench warfare. You're hiding in these trenches. And it says that this stalemate lasted 4 years. So they weren't in these trenches for 4 weeks like they thought. Worst case, we'll be in a trench for 4 weeks. Instead, they're in these trenches for 4 years. That's a whole different thing. And so what happens when I'm in trenches, I have machine guns, I have chemical weapons, and my strategy is let's run to the other side? Well, look at these numbers. These are numbers of deaths, not in the whole war, but in a single place, a single battle. I filled out Verdun, the Battle of Verdun. Add those up roughly, how many people died in one battle? Yeah, it's like 600,000 in one battle. On the right-hand column, the Battle of the Somme River, British losses, let's write down, was 420,000. In one battle, one place. 420,000. The German losses, one battle, one place, we wrote down, was 450,000. I already put the French losses for you at 200,000. Listen, one battle, one place, 1 million people died. One battle, one place. We've literally never seen anything like this before. And this is why people thought, man, this is like the worst thing we've ever done as humans. This is probably the war to end all wars. I don't think we can see anything worse than that. Until we did. In the same place, with the same countries. Germany, it says on the handout, also isn't just doing amazing things on land, they're also doing amazing things at sea. Germany uses the new, you'll write down, U-boat, like the letter U, U-boat. We don't call them U-boats today. They're called U-boats because they went underwater. They are submarines. So they also have submarines for the first time, which is like an impressive new way to kill people secretly. In fact, it says they attacked every British ship they could, but maybe bad for them, they sank a famous ship called the Lusitania. The reason that that's noteworthy, it says the Lusitania had some, you'll write down, 139 Americans. Now, this isn't directly why, but it is on the list of things because we don't go to war with them right away.
No.
But it is on the list. If you just sank a ship with 139 Americans, it's going to make it more likely we, the U.S., are going to jump in. Go ahead, Logan. It's filled out for you. My apologies. Lusitania. It's already there. The home front. At home, some products like meat and coal were rationed. You'll write down for the war. So there was like meatless Mondays where HEB wouldn't sell meat and say, sorry, the meat that we had on Monday, we're actually sending it for the boys. And then there's other people as well brought into the war. Because as you remember, Africa is controlled by the Europeans. And the Europeans are like, you know what? I don't have enough people digging trenches. I don't have enough hospital workers. I don't have enough ambulance drivers. Where can we get a bunch of those people? Hey, let's bring Africans and Indians in to help out with what we can't do on our own. It says on your handout, thousands of Africans, Indians, and Chinese. African Indians and Chinese were recruited for heavy labor in Europe. It wasn't their war, but they were forced to participate. Women have an interesting opportunity. If all the men are at war, what might women have to do that could be an interesting opportunity at home? They can get jobs in factories. Women were hired because all the men were at work. And this is interesting. It's getting women outside of the home. And in some ways, this could be a good thing. I mean, of course, there's challenges as well, but this could be a good thing. Something good could be happening when we look at women of being able to do more than just raise children, which is super important still. Due to the British blockade of supplies, things got desperate in Germany. They had to give up meat. They had to become vegetarian. And then soon the food that they grew ran out. And there's actually one final source of food that the Germans turned to because there's literally nothing else to eat at the end of the war. We're going to write down what did they turn to because they were so desperate. Write down acorns. Can you imagine like the live oak trees that we have? You know how like they drop those like acorns. You see your squirrels get them and they hide them in the yard and they forget about it and like a little oak tree grows because they buried it in the yard but they forget. Can you imagine you like ground up acorns because you have nothing left to eat? That's where the Germans were at. Well, it says on the handout, in addition, we see on the handout over 1 million Africans served in various armies. Over 1 million Africans served in various armies. Where it says, due to the British blockade of supplies, what was the final source of food desperate Germans turned to? Acorns. Over 1 million Africans served in various armies, not because they wanted to, but because they had to. And it says on the handout, up to 3 million were forced to serve by carrying army equipment. Africa is brought into the war not by choice, but because the Europeans have conquered them. We'll do one more, and we'll stop the recording, and we'll finish that last section. It'll take us like 10 minutes for a part 2. The war created economic opportunities for African Americans to leave the South. If you were black in America, most of you lived in the South. But again, white people have left to go and fight the war, which means there's factories in Chicago and Detroit and all throughout the North that are in need of laborers. A lot of American black people leave the South and head, you'll write down, to northern cities to work in factories. This is why today Chicago has a huge black population. This is why today Detroit has a huge black population. They leave the South and head north to work in factories. Oh, I skipped one. Last thing for real. While the rest of the war is fighting, one country hasn't jumped in yet, and they sell guns to the British, and they sell guns to the French. Guess who grew rich doing that? The United States. We'll see when we get back from lunch how the U.S. participates in the war and what happens as a result. So we'll go ahead and take a break here, and we'll finish up in just a moment.
I found out